everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Hi, my name is Barbara Ann Jacques, PhD of Disrupting Gracefully, and I am calling in from Colorado.
Great. And can we go ahead and talk about your past? Anything you want to talk about leading up into what you do now?
Sure.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah. So going back to when I was a child, I was always fascinated with nature and connecting to things that were the unseen and all of that. But for some reason, I ended up working in the criminal justice system. And it actually really fascinated me. I started out in nursing. I could not dissect the cat. So I took a criminal law class, and it just fascinated me, the simple belief that if we passed laws and punished people, we could change society. And it was just insane to me. So I went into that field really wanting to get to know myself better, but also how society worked. So yeah, I worked 15 years in the criminal justice system. And I think I was in active burnout for many of those years and didn't realize it. And then I went into higher education because I do have a love for the field, and I have a love for changing our systems, because our systems are just don't support all of, we don't support society. We support a certain segment of society, and it's very upsetting the way I see it. So I've just dedicated my life to the criminal justice system.
Okay. Yeah. And so 15 years, what have you seen? What did you see?
Well, I can say the first time I ever walked into a courthouse, I went into culture shock. I had no idea. There were certain faces of people in uniforms and certain faces who were on the other side, and it didn't make any sense to me. The whole power over paradigm never made sense to me. So I was in a complete kind of shock of how our system really was, how it was impacting families, how we could pass laws and not see into the future of the damaging results of those laws, all of these things. There was a lot going on internally of how could this be happening, and how could it continue?
Well said. And how do you feel about the laws being made mostly by males versus females?
I think the laws are made by people who look at the laws in a way where they're looking at us against them, trying to control. They're not stepping into the role of the people that they're really governing, if that makes sense.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I think when you're a certain social status and you pass a law, you look at it differently than the way it's going to really impact the people that are going to be arrested for that law. And I think the crack cocaine laws is a perfect example. We could not see past, and I think, so I've been studying shamanism actually since early on. I went into shamanic practices to balance myself working in a toxic environment. I was introduced to shamanic practices. And something that's so beautiful about our indigenous background is that they always looked 7 generations into the future of what they will be doing today and the impact they will make 7 generations forward. And when I look at our lawmakers today, they cannot see past getting elected, forget the impact of the laws that they're passing. I think when we look at the new abortion laws, there's many states out there right now who are forbidding abortion. They're making it a criminal act. But then on the other end, they're not providing the services for these women who need help with the children with special needs. So they just can't see past what they're doing. And I think that's really key, is to be able to see past it. I mean, the crack cocaine laws alone were so damaging to so many communities, and it's usually the underprivileged communities, and the lawmakers couldn't see it.
You're right. My theory a little bit on the abortion is that I feel like there's a lot of baby killers. You're killing a baby, whether it's an embryo, whether it's a fetus, whatever you want to call it, but it grows 10 to 9 months in the stomach. And it's just sad to know that it was this one lady, for instance. She sat up there and she was having like habitual repeat abortions and filming them, and she wound it up on CNN. Just she was happy about it, and I was just like, I'm very disgusted about this because
Mhm.
a doctor getting paid to kill a fetus is just wrong. But all they think about is where that money in them abortion clinics, they go straight to the government, and that's how I feel like, why do we want to kill somebody when we just have so much birth control out there and so
Mhm.
many tactics? What is your theory like on that, Barbara?
I go both ways. I think as a female, if I have experienced a
Traumatic.
traumatic sexual assault, I don't think I should have to go to a courtroom and plead my case.
True.
Uh, but at the same time, I can see where you don't want to, yes, there's a life there. I completely understand and agree with that. I think for me, it's more about somebody else making the decision for me. Does that make sense? But I think like the story you just shared, that's different. That is much different than what I'm thinking. Yeah, abortion should never be a birth control mechanism. But there are definite cases where the health of the mother is at risk. There's a lot of things going on outside of using abortion in that way, where we're being forced to go into a courtroom and say, it's me or the child. What do I do? I have two other children who are here. I need to be here for my children. What do I do? And we just had that case recently, a couple months ago. And so she had to leave her state. And I'm talking about the extreme cases where it's the health of the mom, and that type of environment. It's not just using it, to take care of a one night stand the night before.
I agree. Tell me about like the statistics of, because I was looking at CNN and high-end news companies, and they were saying how the statistics are mostly predominantly African American women. And I'll admit, I had an abortion before to get into the military. So I know I made the right decision, but I would never do it again as a form of continuous birth control.
Right.
But what is the statistics? Is it predominantly African Americans that are suffering from not being able to have birth control? Because isn't it free to get birth control?
I think it depends. It depends on the health insurance that you have, and I think when we looked back at COVID, in the neighborhoods that are lower poverty levels, there's always a lack of resources. There's a lack of education. There's a lack of finances. There's a lack in general. And when we say we're the greatest, country in the world, how can we allow that to happen? The same thing with veterans. How many homeless veterans do we have on the streets? And jumping through hoops to get benefits that they deserve, and it's everywhere. I just see that we live, for me, in a society where it's us against them, and the them is everybody except, the decision makers, a lot of times. Yeah.
So what would you think should be done? Because you've been in this field for like 15 years plus. What do you think, like, for instance, in my next question, I'm gonna add another question in. How can the people that are lower income, like, try to make a law or some sort of petition to change something or intercept something that is hurting them? You
Mhm.
get what I mean? So those are the two questions.
Yeah. So they have to go to they can step up and they can run for office themselves, and I think there's a lot when you go deep inside of a community, there usually is somebody, a pastor, somebody leading the way to support them. There's just different, you have to go into the community and be a part of the community. Something that I've seen a lot is that we don't even know our neighbors, forget what's going on in our community. We're so busy keeping our, nose to the grindstone, doing. We have no chance to be present. So a lot of times decisions are made for us and we just go with it. So we're not even aware. Like I spent three years up until COVID. I started after a bone marrow transplant. I went into something called prisoner visitation and support. And I visited a prisoner for 3 years until COVID shut all of that down. And he was from a very poor neighborhood in Memphis. And it was very interesting because we had so many parallels to our lives, but our faces looked different. Like I had a troubled, he had troubled teen years, but he ended up in a federal prison. Yeah. And I had resources where things were just handled differently. And I think that really, really brought it to light. So even though I worked in the system for 15 years, I have 17 years in higher education, teaching criminal justice. The most profound moment for me when it came to criminal justice was sitting down with this young man. Well, he's in his early 30s, but he was young from the time he went into that federal prison, and just speaking to him and hearing about his experiences and how there were so many parallels, but his community handled things differently than my community did. I grew up in a white, middle-class, working neighborhood. He did not.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I don't want you to ever, and I know you don't have to yay or nay this, but don't ever beat yourself up because you're very open to change and you are taking up for lower class people. So don't feel bad for growing up in the middle class. You just happen to be the one growing up in the middle class, and God put you there for a reason because now you're helping people like us. So pretty much my next question would be, tell me more about your bone marrow, and then we'll come back to this. Tell me the horrific story that changed your life with the bone marrow thing.
Okay, so the 15 years in criminal justice and striving. So I was working, raising a family, doing all these things, working on a PhD, just go. And in 2014, I fainted, and nobody knew what was the matter, and blood started pouring out of my nose. Long story short, I was in bone marrow failure. I had been pushing through, and I had no idea I was in bone marrow failure until I absolutely collapsed. And so I ended up in the hospital. I had to have a bone marrow transplant. So they killed off all of the cells in my body and infused the DNA. So for my criminology students, it's really kind of interesting because I have two different DNA. Like if you DNA my hair, it's my family. If you DNA my blood, it's my donor's family. So yeah. So, I mean, that just on a side note, but so when I was in the hospital, it didn't work. The bone marrow transplant didn't work initially. So I had a lot of time to think about my life and had I made the impact I wished to make on my life on others. And I realized that I had done a lot of things that I was proud of. I was really proud of things I had done, but there was so much more in me. Like I had played small to stay in my lane, I think, all that time, especially working in, the masculine dominated fields. And I kind of bartered a little with God. I'm like, hey, if I get a second chance, I'll show up differently. And I did get that second chance. So it took a year. I had blood transfusions every 2 to 3 days just to keep me alive until the bone marrow transplant worked. And over that time, I just realized I'm going to show up differently. And that's how my business, Disrupting Gracefully, came to be, because the biggest thing that I had learned studying criminal behavior, studying my own behavior, studying my friends' behavior, was that we were always in auto mode. we were never in inner mode. So like we never really
elaborate.
yeah. So we're raised, from the time we're 7 on, well, from the time we're born, we're just programmed to be certain people. Mom and dad program us to, they teach us, but we become programmed. It becomes automatic. Our responses are all automatic based on the education, the conditioning that we all receive growing up, because our parents want us to show up as a certain type of a person. So most of our life is just automatic. We don't even realize, we don't even think before, and we're kind of disconnected. And for me, I found that I was disconnected from me, just being on auto mode, meeting the expectations of everybody else I was around. Does that make sense? Yeah. So disrupting gracefully is disrupting all of these patterns, behaviors, programs in yourself. So when you lead, you show up and you lead differently. You are leading connected to who you are and how you came to what you came to express in this world. And I think it's the end of playing small for women, especially.
Well said. Can you tell me about what you do on the side with the metaphysical?
Yeah.
I have to know, because you're excellent.
The shamanic practices, the connection to nature, it's just really just being present and connected to everything. So I don't even know what to say. I've been a hypnotherapist for years. I've taught intuition. I've taught channeling. I've taught a long list of metaphysical things. But for me, it's a connection to nature, because that's the interconnectedness to everything. And I think when we start going out and connecting more fully with nature in that way, we can connect more fully with the human beings in our lives.
How do you apply the metaphysical things you've learned to going to work, in law or teaching right now? Like,
yeah. So I was tasked with rewriting the whole Justice Administration program many years ago. Yeah. So I had to keep the basic formats of what was important for them. But for me, what I did is I tried to bring in that unity piece where we're not looking at everybody as us against them. They need to be punished. They need to be taught a lesson. No, we need to understand what's happening, what's causing it, and we have to approach it from that end. It's not about power over, I'll give you more punishment. It's what's causing it and how can we get to the root of this and how do we change what's happening in society? Because we are all the same. We're all the same. And when we keep looking at people as them, we just keep perpetuating these systems.
do you think we need more jail systems since the invasion, and to take out the people that are innocent and put in the people that are really harming our United States of America?
Yeah, there's absolutely a certain segment of society that belongs in prison, but we over incarcerate. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world, really, and we have made a lot of strides on rehabilitation and all of those things, but it's really hard, I think, to rehabilitate a person who's had 20 years of doing it one way. So yeah, you need to get to the young moms, young dads, and help them from the get-go, not when it's too late, And at any time we can change our behavior. I mean, there's a lot of science out there right now on rewiring your brain. It's completely possible, but it takes time to rewire in new programs, new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking about things.
I definitely agree, Barbara. I just, I feel like, to me, I feel like right now that people that should be rehabilitated, that should be more focused on, that made one mistake, especially when they just had one crime done, did one crime, and they need to be the most rehabilitated, because that way they know, and they know what they'll face if they do it again, because repeat offenders rotate. Like, I'm not going to lie, I've been to jail one time in my entire life, and I seen how they were rotating people in and out, like felonies, and it just wasn't right. It was in King County Jail, and they kept me, and I was like, why are they keeping me like I'm Hannibal Lecter or something, But how do you feel about that? I'm not trying to drag you into my stuff. I just want to know what have you learned over the years, and how do you feel about what I just said?
Yeah, I from the get-go, that's always upset me. Like, where are we putting our priorities? It's because, again, I think we're always going back to, let me teach them a lesson. It's not, teaching a lesson is not just being locked up in prison. I don't really believe in lessons at all, and I struggle with the whole concept of rehabilitation too, because when you look at that word, there's an assumption that there's something broken in that person to begin with. So there's a lot of language, I think, that's pretty, it's subliminal language that we hear, like, oh, I need to be rehabilitated. There's something wrong with me. And sometimes it's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with the system. It's the system you grew up in. I saw a lot of people who were in the system because of addiction. And I don't understand. I don't have the answers to what to do when somebody is in the throes of addiction and is, repeatedly committing crimes. But I know that our system right now doesn't support getting them back on their feet. Like, my PhD was actually in a DUI court. My dissertation, I did a study on a DUI court, and it was really, yeah. It was, I did the first mixed method. Everybody always looks at the data. Do they succeed? How long do they succeed? How long did it take them to get blah, 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 all of that, the hard data. I went in and I interviewed participants about their experiences, because that was a huge gap in the field. We create these systems to help people, but we don't sit down with people and ask them what they need. How can we help you? So I asked them a lot of things, and I found that a lot of times they were just learned new ways to skirt the system, to beat the system. So it's very interesting. Until then, they got too tired of running around and trying to beat the system, and they just wanted to graduate. And they finally saw that it was time to make the changes in their life. So it was a really interesting study. And, the court had never sat down with the people that they were working with. We were making rules for people, but we weren't looking at how the rules were impacting the actual participants.
You're right. Some people just, even in jail, they try to beat the system, saying, I'm never going to do it again. And they're back in there 2 weeks later, and then you got some people that really take it seriously and want to graduate and want to try to collaborate with the court system so that they can study them and make a change and say, hey, look, he was a success story. Now what? How do we make a lot more success stories instead of people that just want to beat the system?
Right.
And where do you have a book, by the way?
I'm a co-author of a book. It's called Soul Love, Igniting the Spark Within. And so but in the story, it's a very metaphysical piece of me that I share. I was very lucky to be with my father in consciousness when he passed over. Totally unexpected. I didn't even know his heart had stopped. I didn't know any of it. I just was having a conversation with my dad in my head, and turns out he had had a heart attack and his heart had stopped. And 2,000 miles away, they were working on reviving him, and I had no idea. So we're all interconnected with that energy. Yeah. We can all interact in that energy if we take the time to disconnect and know that we're all connected in a field, beyond what we can touch. So
Wow. And was it a bestseller or any of that?
it was an international bestseller. Yep. So I, I want to say there's at least 10 others. Don't quote me, I'm not sure, but there were several other authors in this book. We just wrote a chapter each in experience. So what I really wrote about is I wrote about like the states of being and how you create things in your life. And for me, you're either in victimhood, false empowerment, where you're checking all the boxes, getting all the education, and then wholeness, which is a step that a lot of us I've found in my studies we're just not there. We beat ourselves up. We do all of these things, and then the multidimensionality, and that's where I was when I was with my dad. And I have another book.
Mind, your unconscious mind or your subconscious or conscious?
Yeah. So there's differences there. So I think, yeah, you have to get deep in we're all consciousness. We'll put it that way. We're all consciousness. We don't have to put it into those different layers, but when in our conscious mind, it's what we're thinking in the immediate. The rest of it is, yeah, it's outside of us. It's all of us. I don't want to say it's outside of us. It's still accessed through our brains, but it's the mind, if that makes sense. So it's not the organ, the brain, but it's the mind. We go beyond the organ of the brain. So yeah.
Wow. That is so different. But at least you got to see him and y'all had a conversation. Did he tell you he passed or expired, or did you feel it in your heart?
I saw him cross over with my grandmother. And so I knew. And then as I was watching him walk away, I was freaking out in my brain saying, what's happening here? Hello. And my phone rang, and it was my sister to tell me that the hospital had called and said they had been working on him for 15 minutes and that they would work on him for another 15 minutes to see if they could bring him back, but they didn't expect that they'd be able to. And I told her, I said, he's not coming back.
Did this happen before your bone marrow or after transplant?
This happened after.
You know, they say you connect more to the spiritual world when you have like traumatic events in your life happen. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, I think we let go when we have a traumatic experience. We kind of let go of the way things based on other people's expectations, and we go with what's right within. I mean, having those type of experience, I've never had that type of experience, but connections to the field I've had my entire life. I've seen different things my entire life that a lot of people just don't see.
I believe you. Where are you headed, Barbara, in the future?
I am really working with Disrupting Gracefully, working with women who are ready to. So the one thing I did when I was working in the field, I had a holistic health practice on the side. So I was teaching women how to take better care of themselves. And then on Monday, they were going back into the toxic relationships. But there is that gap. There's that gap, you know, where we take care of ourselves on the weekends, or we go to our metaphysical things or whatever we do, and then we go back into toxic relationships, work, whatever it is, on Monday. And now I've realized my role in life is to fill that gap. So we're not just working on ourselves on the weekend. We're always 100% all of us, full expression. So we take all of us into work on Monday, and we show up fully in ourselves unapologetically. And that's how we change our systems. So I work with women to support them in doing that, because we have such incredible visions for our future. And sometimes we just feel that the systems, our bosses, or even our own self-doubt prevent us from expressing that. So I am here to support women in expressing it.
Okay. And for 2 minutes, you're very well intelligent. I have to know, for 2 minutes, you have the floor. Anything that you would like to add before I ask you how the people can reach you?
I just had a really great conversation. Yeah, I always love to talk about criminal justice. I won't say there's justice or injustice. I could go down the rabbit hole on that, but I'm all about changing our systems. It's not just the criminal justice system, it's our education system, it's our healthcare system. When I went into bone marrow failure, the drug that they were initially treating me with was the most expensive drug in the world. And if I did not have the health insurance I had, I would not have received it. So there's a lot of systems that need to be changed. And I know it's time for women to step up, and men too, who are ready to change those outdated systems as well.
Is there a solution? Do we need to have like a safe group, like a rally or something where we petition something? Like, how can we get started with changing these systems? Teachers aren't making enough pay either, you
You know what
know?
I'm thinking? Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And they're shaping our future. I think, personally, I think if we started building things outside of the systems, it would be like, I've always thought of maybe creating, like when my 7-year-old grandchildren they're twins, when they went into school, there were a lot of things there that I was like, I don't like this. I'm not comfortable with this. I'm like, what about homeschooling? And so there are different things that we can do. There's alternatives. We don't always have to rely on that system. And I think in communities, if we're more cohesive as a community and we had more things in the community, we wouldn't rely on those systems. Healthcare, that's a whole different ball of wax. But education, we can step out of the education system. We can do other things. We can homeschool. We can create businesses that, teach the people how to homeschool, like go into somebody's home. It doesn't have to be the parent. It could be somebody coming in and doing that. We have other ways if we just sit down and think, okay, I don't want to just pretend you are reinventing the whole world, and then you don't get stuck in the system.
Well said, Barbara. How can the people reach you? I hate to have to let you go, but how can the people reach you?
Disruptinggracefully.com. And I don't want to confuse that with gracefully as the tiptoeing through and all that. The grace for me is the connection to your inner wholeness, who you are. Grace, the connection to all it is. So we disrupt our systems by connecting to who we are, not angrily trying to push through and fight the systems. We just change them with our presence, with our beautiful presence, and keep moving forward. So it's disruptinggracefully.com. Barbara Ann Jacques at Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. Yeah.
Well said. Thank you so much. Stay on the line.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much for watching my show, and listening. Y'all take care, be safe, and I'll see you in a bit. Bye.